Sorry I got cut off on the last one. As I was talking, I panicked and noticed I had like 10 seconds left. So, we left off on proximal distal trends. So, to not be in a rush to explain this one too much, kids control their torsos long before their limbs. So, if you've ever seen a little kid have a toy behind them, most of us, if I had something behind me, I'd turn my head and reach my arm around and just grab it. But babies, when they have something behind them, they turn their whole entire body to grab it and pull it over. Or when they try to grab a coffee cup per se, for me, I just reach out and grab it with my hand and move it as I need. For a baby, it's like the whole arm goes to grab it and to yank it away, or both arms go to grab it. And that's because it radiates out. So their torso first, then maybe their entire arm. And then maybe we start figuring out we have hands and wrists that can work independently, and you don't have to use the whole limb to do everything, the whole body to do something. So it's the way we develop, and it's why babies kind of look weird when they're trying to like move and reach things. And we're like, you could do that in an easier way. Actually, they can't, because their brain and their body hasn't like developed enough to have those motor skills. So when we talk about maturation, it's this idea that the biological growth process is this orderly change in behaviors. To an extent, we're similar in our development, but it varies on a timeline. So the example would be that most babies, or all babies, are going to learn to sit on their own unattended before they learn to walk. No baby is probably going to be like, I'm just going to start taking my first steps, but I still don't know how to sit up by myself without falling over. That's just not the order things go in. So if we look at it, a baby will learn to lift its head up first and have neck control before it starts being able to sit on its own. So rolling over, sitting without a support is there before we start walking on our own and before we start standing. Like, all of these things go in somewhat of an order overall, but everyone does it at different months. So you might have a baby, we might have somebody in our class when I read your neonate papers that I'll talk about at the end, where they were walking at 9 months old. Then we'll have other kids in class that are like, yeah, I didn't walk till like 14 months. And that's okay. It says nothing about our cognitive development. Sometimes our bodies just aren't ready, or we're just not ready to start doing that. Our cerebellum develops at different rates. Nothing I do can make my baby be a 9-month-old walker versus a 12-month-old walker. Certain cultures can push for earlier walking to occur, but honestly, it's all about when the brain develops and when the kid is ready to do it. So it's this idea that we progress through predictable stages, and our environment doesn't dramatically like affect that. Like I said, I can want my baby to do certain things, but it doesn't matter if I want them to. Sometimes they just can't. So, even like holding their heads up, it's a lot of work. And I always called my kid a tummy time dropout, because I'd put him on his tummy and he wouldn't be able to hold his head up. I think he could at some point, but he was just lazy and he'd just lay his head down on the floor and yell at me. Until we figured out, like, oh, I'll prop him up on this, and then he could use his head more. Like, my kid had the ability to stuff. I always joked that he was just lazy to do it. So it is just a timing factor of when the kid's ready, whether they're developed enough or they're motivated enough to figure it out. Now, so the sequence we would say is about the same, but timing varies. One of the things I'll talk about in the video, Science of Babies, is not every baby crawls. So I showed you the video of my kid pulling himself army crawling with his arms. And he eventually did that. Well, he did that for a long, long while with no leg use. And then even when he started using his legs, he didn't get up like that classic baby that's crawling on their hands and knees. He probably started pulling himself up on stuff before he actually figured out, oh, I can crawl up on top of my knees and get around pretty good. He was pulling up long before he figured that out. Some babies don't crawl at all like that. You might have been a baby when you ask your parents, were you a scooter? Some babies will sit with their legs crossed and just like hop, or they'll like scoot places on their tush. Some babies never, quote, crawl. They move. Some babies will just figure out like, oh, if I roll around a lot, I can get from point A to point B. It's not a deficit. Babies just need to learn how to move from point A to point B. It doesn't matter what they look like when they do it. And the video shows some really interesting ways that babies learn to get from here to there. So sitting up around 6 months for a lot of us. Walking is usually around the first year of life, typically around that year birthday mark. So 25% have learned by the time they're 11 months old. 50% have learned by the time their first birthday hits. And then you have 90% that are walking by the time they're 15 months. I think it's like the 14 or 15 month mark where doctors start being concerned and asking like, okay, let's see if anything else is happening here. Maybe they're just taking their time. But usually after 14, 15 months, I know doctors usually say, well, we should keep an eye on it and keep trying. But like I said, it doesn't mean a deficit. We have kids in this class sitting here that were 9-month walkers, some that were 14-month-old walkers, and you're all doing great, right? It doesn't say anything about your future development based on what time you walked at. So we know culture is a piece of what makes a kid walk. So if the culture emphasizes walking, the baby can walk at a younger age. We are definitely a culture like that emphasizes walking because we're like, hey, come on, try to walk. That's why we have a large population of babies who do walk at like 9, 10 months. We're always trying to get a kid to walk. Even when I babysit my sister's kid, I'm like, here, stand up. Here, take a step. Like I'm always messing with her, trying to get it because it's just ingrained in our culture. Versus some cultures are like, no, if my kid walks, it's going to be, something that's not necessary right now. So maybe they keep them strapped to their back all the time, right? Baby carrying. But we also know that nature has a lot to do with the genetics. Twins, identical twins, usually end up taking their first steps on the same exact day. So it seems to be also a genetic component. Toilet training, it is a beast of its own, and it's one of those things where, my mom would always say, you need to get them potty trained, stop paying for diapers. You guys were potty trained really, really young. Well, the thing is, toilet training happens when their body's ready. Yeah, I would have loved my kid to be potty trained at like 9 months old, 10 months old, a year old. That would have been great. But it didn't happen because he wasn't ready. It's one of those things that physically the body has to mature enough that they understand what it feels like to have to go to the bathroom and realizing that means I need to go do this next step, right? So feeling the process and carrying through with it. Toilet training doesn't work if the kid's not physically ready and developed enough. And so I know one of the facts that doctors always say is boys also potty train later than girls. So often when you hear these stories of early potty training, they are usually girls for whatever reason. But it's once again, you can't force it to happen because you want it to. It's going to happen when the kid is physically developed enough, even though it might be really frustrating for you. Now, temperament. We talked about personality and how personality seems to be something that it ebbs and flows and kind of changes a little bit as we age, depending on what we've experienced and how we've accommodated or evolved and adapted to our world. Temperament is characteristic, emotional reactivity and intensity, and this is something that they say doesn't change too much. If you were a baby who was super emotional and reactive to situations in a very over-the-top way, you are probably somebody who is also over-the-top and emotionally reactive today to some degree. So they did these studies where they took emotionally reactive newborns and the ones that were born just from infancy, early infancy, and they were very reactive emotionally and they cried about things and anything's changed, they flipped out. They also were reactive 9-month-olds. So within that first year of life, we saw it continue. They've done longer studies where babies who were emotionally reactive, so around 4 months old, if anything were to change the setting, they were uprooted, they did this or that, they'd arch their back and they'd scream and they'd pump their legs. At 2 years old, these were kids who were more fearful of things, so emotional. And then babies who were more smiley when things changed at 4 months old, they were super sociable 4-year-olds. They didn't really react to things in an emotional way. They just were kind of chill. So we see these babies who were the fearful criers at age 2. They're often relatively shy 8-year-olds. And then the kids that were more sociable at age 2, still really sociable 8-year-olds. So it just seems to be something that's a little bit more solid. So maybe when you're asking your parents about you as a baby, if you're like, you were such a chill baby, you never really cared about much, you were really easygoing, there's a good chance that today you're still going to be described as a rather easygoing person and not somebody who's emotional or doesn't like change or is shy and kind of, nervous about things. So when we look at temperament, we're not going to fill out a survey or anything, but they look at how active are they, how energetic is that kid, how sociable are they, and then emotionality. Do they react strongly in terms of like feeling distress, fearfulness, or anger? Do they have high rankings on these measurements? So, babies and our temperaments, they change, they go with us throughout life. So if somebody were to ask, what is something that's a stable characteristic throughout lifespan, we would probably say temperament. Temperament is something that is stable, while personality seems to fluctuate a little bit more. Unfortunately, when we talk about like personality, we'll mean temperament. Like, oh yeah, you were such a chill baby, your personality was always really laid back. We're talking about temperament there. It's their emotional reactivity to a situation. So I think that's it for this one. Oh, this is me looking at my kid who, I would say he was a pretty happy, chill baby. He's still, well, he's emotional. He's really social. And so he would probably be one of those babies that's much more on the, quote, easygoing scale of things. So when we look at easy babies, difficult babies, slow to warm up, I got lucky and had an easy baby who was really happy and cool with strangers and stuff, you know, normal reactions of crying, as kids do. But his social temperament, he's a very social kid. And so you might have been an easy baby. You might have been a difficult baby where you cried and reacted and didn't like change and, you know, were shy and other things. And then you do have slow to warm up babies that they're just a little bit more chill about things. Do you want to say hi?
Mom.
One sec. See? Social. And so we're not going to do the temperament survey since we're not there, but we can go over all the different meanings of it. You can test your own temperament. I'm sure there's online quizzes you can take to tell what your temperament was and compare it to your family or friends' stories of when you were a baby. So that's it for when the baby arrives. One of your assignments to do is a neonate paper. And so I have it on a Google Doc on Classroom for you. And what you need to do is go interview somebody who knew you when you were a baby. You can call them if you live with them in their home, like great, ask them. You have to write me a page, double-spaced, 12-point font. So it's actually not that hard because it's super informal. I don't need an introduction, conclusion, research. No, I want you to tell me like a one-page story about when you were little. You could tell me about your birth story when you were a baby, if you have any funny stories from when you were a kid that your parents just love telling, if they know when you took your first steps or sat up first, or like anything interesting about your development when you were an infant or even prenatal stuff. Right? So this is neonate when you are newborn. What kind of stories do you have to tell? It's always a fun activity, and it gets parents kind of, you know, thinking about when their kids were little as you guys are seniors and ready to graduate. Another assignment we're going to have this unit that I'll introduce later this week is going to be our scrapbook, where you get to make up this awesome, fantastic, made-up life of your own. So, yeah, it's a good unit to kind of talk about all of the things that we have going on collectively in our lives and kind of reflecting on stuff. So, all right. After this, I think we go into Piaget and Erikson, which I'm actually going to do just Zoom meetings with you and go over the stuff in person, I think. So you guys can ask questions about it because that's the stuff that I find kids have a lot more questions about. So, all right. Thank you, guys.